split stitch. Split stitch is my favorite stitch. I use it for kind of everything. It is a really good stitch for line work, and especially I think for filling areas, especially large or irregular areas. It has a bit of a texture to it that I think is very kind of organic, but also allows you to just like fill in full areas of color that are consistent looking. So I usually use it for like very natural looking things like animals or, anything that I kind of need to fill an entire area with. You can also change the direction of it to get some of the like reflection that you can differentiate areas with. So for example, like I have stitched this way horizontally here and vertically here, and that helps to separate those areas so they have some difference to them. I'll probably still outline those with black, but it helps to give you even more of a naturalistic feel. To make your split stitch, all you need to do is start by bringing your needle up through the fabric all the way to the knot and go down along your line like you were just making a straight stitch or starting a back stitch. Now that that first line is done, I am going to bring my needle back up through the fabric and pierce that stitch, splitting it. So splitting the individual threads. And dividing the stitch and bringing my thread up through it. And then I'm going to come back down further along the line and back up where my first stitch ended, and coming back up through that new stitch and back down the line. That way I am making a continuous line that has no breaks in it, in the way that like a back stitch has breaks in the line. So I'm just going to come all the way down my line. So my first line is all split stitched. You can see it makes a nice like continuous line, and it has this sort of braided texture to it. You can see that here as well. Yeah, so it has this kind of like chainy braided texture to it. And the fewer strands that you use, the less like noticeable that would be. So if I was using one strand of thread, it would just look like a single line. A lot of people use split stitch for line work. So let's do the wavy line. And with anything that's curved tightly, like these curves are, the thing that you always want to keep in mind is to make your stitches much smaller, much shorter. And especially when you have a tight curve, you want to make sure that when you are turning it, you are not turning at like a 90-degree angle. So when I reach the top here with this curve, I want to make sure that I am staying inline of my previous stitch so that I'm not like leaving out a little sticky out place. I want to make sure that I am staying on the right trajectory and not trying to curve immediately. And you can change the rate of your stitches, by which I mean you can make a longer one and then a shorter one, but you're going to be able to see that inconsistency. So it's just something to keep in mind. You don't have to make every stitch perfect, but it will change the way that it looks. So when you are filling in an area, the only thing you really need to keep in mind is the direction of your stitch, and then you just need to cover the area. So my favorite way to do that is just to make rows and rows of split stitch. So I have this little square, and I'll come up on one side, and I can come back down into the border or just like shove my needle underneath that space. But I'm just going to start making a row of split stitch next to my first split stitch. Now that my first row is done, I'm just going to come back in and start making another row, and I'll do that until the whole area that I want to fill is filled up. Doesn't matter what shape it is. If I'm just keeping my stitches all going in the same direction, I'll get this very even and consistent fill. So here are some of my examples. There is some texture to it, but it's all very consistent texture. And because you have that outside outline, you also get this sort of outline effect. This is also really good for if you are stitching anything that is going to be worn or used in any way, because the split stitch has a really stable structure, because it is building upon each stitch and like chaining the stitches together through the fabric. You can also fill an area by following the same shape as your outline, but because you are changing the direction of your stitch every time, you get kind of a light reflection difference that is kind of neat. So like, because this is circular, there's sort of a spiraling effect. I don't know how well that is kind of showing up on camera, but yeah, you get sort of more of a spiral effect as you are moving your stitches further and further in to the center there, which, if that's what you want to go for, I think is a really neat effect. And you can embroider on top of split stitch very easily. I have a video on that. I usually just do like back stitch and stuff on top of it, but it's really good for detailing and line work and whatnot. So that's split stitch. That's my favorite stitch. It's very easy. It's very versatile. And in my opinion, it looks very good.